Good morning. My name's Sara, and I'm joined by my colleagues Mark Withers and Wayne Myers and Jeff Meisner. So we're here today. We're going to talk about the 6 tax features that every shopping cart needs. Here we go. I've got 6 different topics here, and so it's just really going to start out with merchants are just expecting tax. I think there was a time where you think about e-commerce as adding tax is a nice to have, it's a good feature to have in your shopping cart, but it's really transitioned into this is a fundamental part of every e-commerce platform. So talking a little bit about that. The second piece is spending a little bit more time about how e-commerce is part of omni-channel selling. There's a lot of merchants that sell on multiple channels, and that's just growing. So we're going to spend a little bit of time there. We're going to get right to the heart of it when it comes to you need tax in your shopping cart right now. Let's do that right now, and then thinking through some of the complex scenarios. The fifth part has to do with, again, thinking about the end objective, which is for merchants to be compliant. Calculating tax is part of that full compliance chain, and then we've got some resources to learn more about tax and tax in your shopping cart. So that's what we're going to cover. When I put this deck together, I went to the Avalara website and I was going to look for this information. Of course, it's there, but then I thought, no, we'll just go out and we'll find other resources to talk about how online selling is just growing. So I've just got a couple slides. Really just to set the stage, I bet you guys already know this, but yes, online selling, it's growing year after year after year, and that's just the trend. That's the online selling trend. So we know this, but putting this up here just to help set the stage about the relevance of calculating tax with online selling, because that is a growing trend. And then I grabbed this other post, with the Wayfair ruling, there's also just a shift in the demand for tax for online sellers. This one is a recent article about California, and beginning April 1st, they're going to be having merchants that meet a certain economic threshold to be able to be required to start calculating tax. So again, setting the precedence here. And then the last one that I grabbed is, small businesses need to know these things. It's, the audit risks are getting higher, economic nexus is shifting, and not only is it shifting, but it's adjusting monthly. Like it's just adjusting monthly. All right, so we know this, but setting the precedent that tax in your shopping cart is a must. It's not a nice to have. All right, one more piece about context is that merchants are selling in multiple channels, right? So whether it's a marketplace, it's one shopping cart, it's 2 shopping carts, it's 3 shopping carts, there's a lot of ways that merchants are selling. And so, if you think of yourself as, the developer hero, you've got to be able to, beyond just, designing, building, coding, testing, out the door, that's one part of it, but the real developer heroes think a little bit about the broader objective about what solving the problem looks like, or really figuring out tax, not only calculating, but the ultimate objective is about compliance, and then compliance in all of these different selling channels. So I've got this slide up here really just to help communicate the omni-channel world of merchants. Today's conversation is purely on e-commerce. And even with e-commerce, there's usually multiple channels in e-commerce and marketplaces. All right, so from that, we're going to go right into e-commerce, and there's a lot of things that Avalara can do with e-commerce, but let's talk about building that integration from the fundamentals, and then we're going to be expanding on some of the complicated scenarios that you can think through. Okay, so Mark and I have worked together for a long time. Let's talk about, I need tax in my cart right now. How do I do this?
So if you're trying to get into if you're in the buy decision mode and you're trying to evaluate, what can you use out there to solve this sales tax problem, to automate, You're going to go to somebody's website like Avalara's. You're going to look at likely go find the developer page, and there's some options when you get there. You can, at least in Avalara's case, you can sign up for a free trial, a 60-day free trial. That gives you full access to the compliance platform that Avalara has, and you can start your journey today. The primary endpoints, as you kind of dig around as a developer, you're going to want to know, well, what do I need to do? Where do I go to make my first tax call? How do I get going? If you get into our API, you'll see that it's pretty rich. There's a lot of endpoints, a lot of namespaces, a lot of things that you can do with the service. But
which is cool.
Which is great because
you want to do.
You don't want to be locked into a limited capability. You want to have a platform that's going to grow with you and your business. But if you're a developer that's with a platform and you would like to automate sales tax within that platform and you want to do this in a repeatable way, there's 4 methods that we'll talk about real quick. If you're not, you just need to solve this problem for your company and get automated, get the tax automated. You can downsize the 4 endpoints I'm going to discuss real quick today. So if let's say you want to become a partner or you're a platform and you're going to use Avalara to provide automation for many of your clients. One of the endpoints that you'll want to become familiar with is ping. What's it do? It just says you've got a connection to our service. Pretty simple. But it gives your customers that confidence when they put in their username, password, or their tokens, that when they get done entering that and they hit save, you can hit our service and give them a message confirmation that everything's working as expected.
So you get your trial, you get the credentials with your trial account, and then you use those credentials in the ping.
You can use those credentials in the ping and get confidence that you're communicating between your input and ours. The other thing, if you are doing a reusable solution, one of the items that you need to be cognizant of is that in any tax request to add a tax, we need to know which company you're transacting against. Avalara, you can get an account, and then within the account, you can create n number of companies depending on the complexity of your business. So one of the things that you need to be able to provide us is the company code that you've set up in Avatax. So that can be a chicken and egg thing, and so to just reduce any of the complexities around that and make it friction-free, you could use the query company endpoint. Once you've got a connection, you can use the query company endpoint to list the companies that have been set up in Avatax, so there's no ambiguity. Just have the customer set the company, and we're off and running.
One more thing I want to add on that, Mark. And that is this company, you said this, and that is in your Avatax account, you can set up multiple company profiles. And, wouldn't it be nice that every business has one simple, clean profile? When you calculate tax, it's not just about getting a tax rate and coming back, right? There's a lot more to it, which has to do with that company profile, which is where is that company required to collect and remit tax. So getting tax in your cart, is great for estimates, but really if you're solving the compliance challenge that merchants have, it's calculating tax based on their company profile. And their company profile has their company name and their tax ID and, this funny word called nexus, which, we all live with, but it's really in what jurisdiction is this customer, this merchant, this company, where are they currently registered, collect, and remit tax, because that is what they are required to do to be compliant. Like getting tax is great, but it's really solving the compliance issue, which is getting the tax for their company profile. And companies can have multiples. I mean, I implemented plenty of clients, and they had multiple companies. Maybe they started with one, and then they acquired another business, and they haven't quite merged those together. So it's very common for companies to have multiple profiles.
That's right. Yeah, and even in some, you could have one reporting entity, but you might have a business that wants to report their sales by business divisions and all roll up to one reporting entity, and all that can be handled in Avatax. So one of the stumbling blocks that people run into when they get their free trial is they immediately, as a developer, you want to just use the create transaction call and create a transaction and get back tax. How come I'm not getting back any tax?
I'm having tax. I
I don't have any tax. I did something wrong. Well, you haven't done anything wrong. You just haven't logged into Avatax and set up a company as Sara was outlining and indicated where you want to collect tax.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the stumbling blocks. When you create your, when you get your account, you got to create a company, test company A, and then, the question is, where do you collect and remit tax, which is, California, New York, right? It's just, build that profile of where, imagine that test company, where are they required to collect and remit tax, which also gives you some good test scenarios because you'll want to run a test that says, I'm doing a transaction in a jurisdiction where I have identified that I need to collect and remit, and then also run a test in a jurisdiction where you're not registered. So anyway, great. Set up your company, turn on some Nexus, those jurisdictions where you're obligated to collect and remit tax, and test against those.
That's right. So how do you get the tests working? So create transaction is really the method that is used, I think, most in our API. It does all the heavy lifting, and with this one endpoint, you can, from a tax calculation perspective, you can handle just about all the use cases that are out there.
What do you mean all the use cases?
Well, you can do estimated tax. You can do you can actually say I've got a liability that I need to record and commit. You can do refunds with it. If you're dealing with what we call out-of-harbor data, where tax has already been calculated by some other endpoint, but you need to feed it into Avalara, you can do tax amount overrides. There's just a lot of use cases you can solve with this method. So this is the one that you're going to circle around. Resolve address. The service requires address input. So that's primarily how we figure out what jurisdictions and the sourcing that's involved in coming up with the correct tax rate and rules to apply to whatever's being sold. So addresses both from and to are critical input. Now the service is we geolocate that address, and we turn that address into a latitude, longitude, and then intersect it with what we call our tax jurisdictions for an extremely accurate tax calculation.
I have a couple things I want to touch on. One is on the address, and then I want to spend a little bit more time on create transactions. So one of the things I want to point out on address is that, I walk into Avalara thinking that tax is calculated based on the destination address every time, and that's not true. Sometimes it's on the origin, sometimes it's a combination of both, and so it's important to have accurate addresses. You can use our API for that, but you don't have to, right? So that's an option.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely necessary to have origin and destination because, jurisdiction by jurisdiction is a little bit different about how they determine which jurisdictional rates that you use.
Right. And another huge win for the Resolve Address API, this is something I run into. This is Wayne Meyer from Developer Relations, in case you're wondering who's talking. Running into people with mature integrations, or they're just beginning to bootstrap their e-commerce solution. Address resolution is a huge deal, and the USPS API agreement does not allow you to use their API for correcting your existing address. So if you have a whole body of customers and you're trying to see if these addresses are valid or if they've shifted, which is really common in rural addresses. An existing address used to be RD3 Knoxon Road, LaGrangeville, New York, is now a fully qualified address that is no longer a rural delivery route. We explicitly allow you to use our Resolve Address API for your own address resolution. So now,
that's great.
Not only you do not need a USPS subscription, for example, or some other company. You can use ours for your own resolution. When your customers are setting up their accounts, hey, is this the address you meant?
That's good.
This is a huge win in our licensing to offer that as you're building up your solution.
All right, so we talked about ping, we talked about querying companies because some companies have one company profile, some have multiple. We talked about resolve address. I want to spend a little bit more time on create transaction. So Mark, can you tell me exactly what information is needed in the create transaction endpoint?
Yeah. So at a high level, because there's a lot of attributes that you can pass to Avatax, but at a high level, you're looking at passing what we refer to as a company code, as we talked about earlier, that code that matches your request with the company that you've defined in Avatax. Although that can be defaulted, it's good to make it explicit. The type of document that you're sending, whether it's a sales order or sales invoice or a return order or return invoice, these various document types are used and helpful to find information in Avatax by those particular document types. Also note, and important to note, especially on the e-commerce front, many of your transactions that you send, a good portion of your transactions that you send into Avatax are going to be estimates. You're going to be going through that shopping cart process. You're going to get to a point where you've collected all the right information. You've got shipping. You've got addresses. You know the customer's potentially going to buy, well, what's my total amount? At that point, you're probably just calling Avalara with a sales order document type. Any document type ending with a suffix of order does not get recorded in Avalara's cloud-based solution. So that's a good thing, because if it's an estimate and they abandoned cart, you don't want to have documents that are laying around in somebody's account and recorded in Avalara. So once you're final, or that transaction is final, then you can make a final call to Avatax using a sales invoice call, and when that call is made, the data is recorded in a customer's Avalara account.
So
go ahead.
Full of interruptions. That's just what I do.
Go for it.
So this slide is all dedicated to, I need tax in my shopping cart right now, so customers get their free trial. They focus on these endpoints. You're right, rich API, you can do lots and lots of things, but you need tax in your shopping cart right now. Focus on those endpoints. Mark, will you talk to us about the SDKs that we have and how folks can use those to go a little bit faster?
Yeah, I mean, so we've got a number of SDKs, .NET, PHP, JavaScript, Java, Rails, Python. You can download. There's package managers for those SDKs that they can pull right into your developer environment. And what it'll essentially do is open up our API through methods that have already wrapped essentially the JSON payloads and the various HTTP requests that you can put together through if you just wanted to consume our API directly. So puts a wrapper around it to help speed up the process. And for example, the .NET SDK, you're going to get all the dot notation that and the prompts that help you when you're coding, so that you can just speed through filling in the attribute lists and filling out the various object models with the values that are necessary. So all the gets and the sets are wrapped up in a nice way. So
it's easy to find these on our developer website, right?
Yes, it's very easy to find. Yep.
The SDK is really where the underlying frameworks allow. They give you strongly typed methods and objects. These SDKs are developed directly off of the REST API. The documentation for these is inline. So, for example, Mark, you mentioned the .NET SDK. If you open the object browser for the .NET SDK, you'll see all of the available objects, methods, and inline documentation. And the IntelliSense is also very handy. IntelliSense it's not IntelliSense in Java. It's always got different names. It's present in the Java SDK. And if you use a more advanced editor, you'll see that in the other languages also. Another added tidbit, the SDKs also include both synchronous and asynchronous methods. I'm sure the non-developers are starting to glaze over right now, but the developers.
Oh, no, this is good stuff.
The developers in the room just sat up a little bit straighter because you roll in synchronous and asynchronous methods. I don't have to roll that myself.
Yeah.
Yes, you're welcome. And the final thing I'd like to say about the SDKs, we use these internally. What's the new term? Drinking our own champagne, or otherwise dog fooding?
No, it's champagne.
Sounds much better than dog food.
I don't know. I do buy my dog really good dog food.
Excellent.
It's still dog food, though.
Fine.
So we actually use these internally. So we understand that any pain points that come up with the SDKs, we use them for testing, we use them for development.
Avalara builds plenty of their own integrations as well, so that's a good point there. I want to add this last bullet here just talks about support. You know what? We've got good documentation. We've got good SDKs, right? We've got a great API. So we've got lots of good stuff there. But I put this point up there: support if you need it. And so the folks that we have in the webinar right now is that we've got Wayne from the developers relations team, and he's a senior in that program. And so when we have customers who have questions about how do I resolve this or that, Wayne's available. And then Mark and I are part of the business development organization at Avalara, and Avalara signs over 100 new partners every year to build connectors to their platforms. And so yes, you totally can build this on your own. The documentation is there, but if you do get stuck at any point in time, and compliance is tricky. So again, that broader objective is we're all here together to resolve the compliance challenges that merchants have. There's some complexities around compliance. So yes, the information's there. Go for it. And if you get stuck, we have a support team in place to be able to figure out those nuances around compliance, because we care about our merchants and our customers. Anything else on this slide, you guys? Okay, so this is I need tax in my shopping cart right now. Here's how to do it. And now we're going to move towards a little bit more about just some of the complexities. And again, I brought this up a little bit earlier about, be the developer hero. Those developers that just really think about what is the broader context that I'm trying to resolve has to do with helping that merchant be compliant. And yes, calculating tax is part of it, but again, it comes down to merchants needing to be compliant. So let's talk about some of the complexities that really help developers be heroes and really say, yeah, I've thought that through and I've figured out a resolution for that. All right, Mark, sometimes people cancel their order.
Yeah, sometimes in your platform, a platform will offer the ability to delete, void, cancel an order. Well, if you've already recorded a transaction in Avatax, that's recording, and potentially committed it, that's recording a tax liability for the seller. If within your seller's platform, we say that transaction should have never happened, delete it, and we don't delete it or void it or cancel it on the Avalara side, you're going to have this reconciliation issue. So to be a hero on that point, if you cancel or say this should have never happened in your e-commerce platform, and you've done something on the Avatax side with respect to recording and committing a transaction, clean up.
And I'm just going to go just a little layman's terms here. So when you say committing a transaction, that means an order's been placed, an invoice has been processed, and a copy of that transaction is stored in that Avatax account along with every other order, so that at the end of the month or end of the quarter or end of the year, when it's time for that business to file their returns, they look at all of the committed invoices. And so when you say cancel an order, the whole point is, if an order was taken, if an invoice was processed and it's sitting in that company profile and their list of transactions for that filing period, it needs to get out.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
And how about refunding? If you cancel an order, don't you want to get refunded?
So refunding, we've got a method that can help make this a little bit easier. But if we're just talking about using the create transaction method, the key trick to being a hero on that point is recognizing that an order could be placed, say, in December and returned in January. And if that happens between December and January in a particular jurisdiction that original invoice was raised, they could have changed the rates. They could have raised the rates, likely raised the rates. And as a result, you don't want to refund a tax amount that is more than what was on that original order. So we have a capability in the create transaction method to issue a tax date override. And when you do that, you're telling Avatax, calculate the tax based on the original order's date, but go ahead and record it / commit it in the current period that refund took place.
And again, just being really overt about this. So I bought something in December from some sort of company, and that company, they had to remit their taxes at the end of, or for the December filing period, and then I go and I return it in January, and then it's already been filed on, right? So the invoice has been recognized, the money's been collected, it's been remitted to the government. But here it's January, and so can you expand a little bit more about,
Well, so the document date that's required
it's the date and it's also the ID, right? Or the dot code.
Well, so the document date is the period that the transaction is going to be reported in. So if you were to say, well, I want the tax to be calculated based on December, and you put in a transaction that's backdated, now you've created a situation that gets messy from a compliance perspective. You've literally created a situation where somebody has to backfile. We don't want to do that.
Nobody wants to do that.
And as far as your other comment with respect to the document code, is it required? Yeah, so we didn't completely finish all the required inputs, and I don't know whether we want to go through that at this point, but yeah, document code. Why is that important as input at the header level? So you tell us what your invoice number is so that we can find it in both your system and our system. So it's very important to pass an identifier, a unique identifier, to Avalara and Avatax to identify the document so that it can be identified in both systems for reconciliation.
Don't pass invoice number. Go for it, Mark.
So you can let Avalara generate an ID for you that's unique. That's great. Less work for you to do. The only issue is if you don't then capture that value, put it in your system, and make it accessible, you're going to create a situation where people can't find data to reconcile between systems. So I always recommend, from at least a partner perspective, don't let Avatax generate goods for you, because it just creates more work on your end to have to record it and keep track of it, and it creates just another value that nobody understands, nobody really rallies around. There's a value in your system, there's a value in your e-commerce platform that makes a transaction unique. Make that the same in Avatax so everybody can find what they're looking for.
Okay. We're going to do that. Let's talk about shipping and handling. So you've got an order, you put some items in your cart, you're going to calculate tax, but there's shipping and handling. So you want to talk a little bit about how to calculate that? Or just the complexities around that?
So the question comes up, well, how do I deal with freight? Well, you add it as another line. So any charges that are outside of just what's been put on that you're buying that's in your shopping cart, if you've got other charges that need to be associated with the order, then you'll create another line input to Avatax and deal with it that way. So for example, if your freight and handling are two separate charges that you break out, and they need different treatment, potentially different tax treatment, you would send those as separate lines. If it's combined, you can combine it, but the bottom line is your freight is going to be sent as another line item in the request to Avatax.
Right.
And I'd like to add on here, taxing shipping and handling. Sometimes it's taxable, sometimes it's not. How do you know? Well, by choosing the Avalara tax code, then just let our engine handle that. Illinois has some weirdness, or is it just Chicago? Or I don't know.
Isn't it in California they tax one but not the other, I believe?
There's
a lot of arcane nuances.
All of that all of this kind of goes into that next bullet about product taxability. So yes, product taxability has some fascinating rules around it, and same with shipping and handling, right? So one item.
Sometimes the freight follows the taxability of the item in the cart. So, yeah.
It's fascinating. Well, maybe we just all think it's fascinating. But absolutely, Avalara's got, 2,000 plus different taxability codes. So whether it's T-shirts or wigs or medical devices or software licenses, you know, you tag this Avalara code against it, and when you've got that code, Avalara includes that in the tax calculation engine to figure out, is it taxable in that jurisdiction or is it not taxable in that jurisdiction? And it even gets a little bit more complex than that because, you know, sometimes it's, is it taxable or not taxable in that jurisdiction? And then sometimes it has to do with a threshold, like it's taxable in this jurisdiction so long as it's X amount of dollars. So there's a lot of complexity on product taxability. And so Avalara has made that easy by, one, providing this broad list of products and services. So we've got our own content and research, and we maintain it, right? So that helps. So yeah, I guess it probably should have said products and service taxability, but that also incorporates taxing and shipping. Wayne, do you have a favorite product taxability code?
Actually, I have not invested any effort into memorizing codes other than basic, tangible, physical property. The ones that...
That's right. Actually, if you don't add a product tax code, it just has the standard taxability that's applied.
Being on developer relations, actually the software codes.
Well, those are your favorite?
I wouldn't say my favorite. There's a lot of voodoo that goes on with those codes. Are you delivering a service, a software service? Is that an on-prem software service for your customer? Different codes of taxability apply, and most of the time, like, does that fit? Yeah, that fits. Okay, fire it, and let Avatax handle it.
I had a super strange conversation about 10 years ago at my prior company where I was doing software implementations, and the controller invited me to his office, and he's like, so when you did that implementation, were you on-premise? Like, yes. Why are you asking? Were you up instructing, or were you touching the computers to help install it? And it was, anyways, I totally understand why I was being asked all those questions, because there's complexity in selling, delivering, implementing software, and it varies state by state or jurisdiction by jurisdiction.
Country to country.
Country to country. All right. Anything else, you guys, on taxability? Are we ready to talk about exemptions? And
I'd like to add on. We ran down a bunch of rabbit holes here, and there are a lot of rabbit holes in tax calculation. But from a very rudimentary standpoint, with a basic transaction, and we have examples of this all over the developer relations blog, the blog and the site, a really basic transaction will get you an accurate response. By putting this together, and we're talking about less than 12 lines, 14 lines in the basic transaction model, and you can test this out for yourself on the developer website. You will get back the most accurate tax transaction for what you're shipping, where you're shipping it.
Yeah. All right, here we go. We're going to do exemptions. So, you know, as I look at this deck, I suppose I should have said handling exemption certificates. So, great, calculating tax. That's great. Another piece, though, beyond taxability is there are some customers that don't have to pay taxes, right? Maybe it's a school, or it's a tribe, or it's the government, and they buy things online as well. And so to identify themselves as not having to pay tax, what they are issued by the government is an exemption certificate. So didn't know that 15 years ago when I grew up in Oregon where we don't have sales tax. But Mark, talk to us a little bit about handling exemptions, identifying those customers that are exempt, and what to do in those situations.
So let's say it's a B2B scenario. Customer, the buyer comes to the seller and says, presents an exemption certificate for the purpose of resale. So as the seller, I'm going to capture that. I'm going to validate that the certificate is valid. And then ideally in that e-commerce scenario, I've got that customer, they're known to me, and I flag them as exempt. So Avatax has, in that request, that basic tax request and create transaction, has an attribute called exemption number, and you can put the exemption number in there, and when you submit it to AvaTax, the tax decision will come back with zero tax and classify the transaction as exempt, so that for reporting purposes, that particular detail gets classified in a particular part on the tax form. There's one level of detail that you could pass to AvaTax, and that's the reason for exemption. So I was exempt as the buyer for the reason I'm a reseller. So we've got predefined exemption reason codes that follow the various rules of all the jurisdictions out there, and when they're passed, then that exempt sale also gets classified in a particular way. And again, some states want the resale exemptions to be broken out separately from, say, government exemptions. So in that case, we can be a little bit more granular and a little bit more accurate in our reporting for compliance. So that's important. One of the other things that we've got going on is you're going to be required to pass us some sort of company or customer identifier, something that uniquely identifies the customer in the system. If it's a guest, then you can just pass whatever. But if it's a known
what do you mean whatever?
A guest, you could say the value is guest,
okay.
or not registered customer, or
okay.
whatever value you want. But if they are known and you've got a valid certificate that is on file for them, you can use another product, Cert Capture, to automate that whole process and digitize the whole arena around exemption handling. And then with that customer ID coming in through the request, we'll marry up the transaction and the jurisdiction and the customer and exempt appropriately.
Cool. All right. I'm going to go to the next slide so that we can have time for questions afterwards. So wouldn't it be cool if I actually called this slide the compliance chain and these were actually chain links, but what we have is some rectangles? Just imagine some really cool chain links. But regardless, I've talked about this, the ultimate objective is solving the merchant's compliance burden. And part of the burden is calculating tax. But the real thoughtful problem that you're designing for is that the merchant register in jurisdictions where they meet some sort of nexus, whether it's physical presence or economic nexus, or there's various reasons. So one is the merchant has to register in a particular jurisdiction, and now they're obligated to collect and remit tax in that jurisdiction. So that's one piece of this. The next piece is, when there is an order, you need to calculate tax for that. So that's the bulk of the conversation today, or the webinar today. Then there's an order, then there's an invoice, and then there's remittance. And so we talked a little bit about when it comes to remittance or filing returns, those invoices, those need to be stored in AvaTax, right? So every time you process an order and you commit that transaction, it'll automatically get stored there. But if you think about merchants and selling through various channels, whether it's marketplaces or multiple shopping carts, the merchant, to be compliant, they need their data consolidated in their AvaTax company profile, so that when it comes time to filing returns, they've got all of that data together. So this is our compliance chain. So calculation, super important, but it's a piece of resolving the ultimate burden that merchants have. Put a couple links up here that you can find on the Avalara website. You know what? Sales tax gets complicated, but we've got some information on our site to be able to explain the basics around sales tax. And then also, you know what? It's kind of tough sometimes to figure out where you need to collect and remit tax, so we've got some guidance on that to help provide some direction. And then also this summer there was a ruling done in South Dakota versus Wayfair that really changes the game for online sellers. So we've got some information on our site to be able to provide some guidance and context about what merchants are experiencing when selling online. Wayne, what do you want to add there?
Actually, where you need to collect and remit sales tax. So as you're branching out with your e-commerce solution, we've actually recently added a feature to the AvaTax update console or UI that we will now tell you when you're starting to approach the new state thresholds for Nexus eligibility.
Yeah, so if you do a bunch of transactions in a particular jurisdiction, Avatax has this little kind of utility going, you're reaching the threshold. Avalara's been paying attention to the thresholds and how they shift month by month, and in this jurisdiction, you're getting a little high. Is that what it does, Wayne?
Yes, little notification, hey,
maybe you should register.
The Department of Revenue might be paying attention to you.
That's a better way to put it. Okay.
Don't run afoul.
All right, so big point in this webinar is, great, get calculation in your shopping cart. You can do that. It is fast. You want to be a hero. Here's some complexities that you can think through. But really, the ultimate objective is trying to figure out how to support those merchants in compliance. So last slide. You know what? You can sign up for a 60-day account. You can do that on our developer website. Go for it. We've got a great API demo, so you can check that out too. Let's see.
Can I just make a note on the API demo?
Yes.
So
yes,
with one click, looking at the demo, you copy the code that's in there. You can literally take that code, paste it into your tool of choice, and make a request to get taxed. So it shouldn't be more than copy, paste, and go.
So you have a challenge. Can people do this in 5 minutes?
I think you could easily do it in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you do it in 2 minutes?
I can do it in 2 minutes.
Okay, great.
And the 60-day free trial, that's on our full production servers, unlimited calls. You get to use everything that Avatax offers.
That's right.
Hey, just to let everyone on the call know, in the chat box, I've entered a bunch of resources that the gang online has been talking about. So that includes the sales tax basics, where to collect and remit tax, also known as Nexus, Wayfair, a link to the free API trial that Sara referenced. And then I also wanted to point out that this presentation is actually based on a quick start developer guide that we put together recently around building tax integrations for e-commerce shopping carts, and that is also in the chat box. So all those resources should be able to help you guys get up and running really fast.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Final 2 bullets I want to mention here is that if you're building, if you're looking to have an Avatax integration in your platform, and this platform serves multiple merchants, Avalara does have a partner opportunity, so there is some revenue share. If you do that, you'll get to work with Mark and I. And then also the last piece is that we have, Avalara has a premier annual conference. This year it's in Huntington Beach, California. We have a full developer track. So yeah, we've got 8 sessions to talk about how fascinating tax is. Yeah, real excited about that. All right, so we covered all the topics. Jeff, have you got some questions that you want to share?
I will check 1 second. I'm also going to enter in the chat box the URL to the Crush site.
Oh, cool.
For everybody. Like Sara said, we have a really kick-butt developer track that is set for that conference. And so let's see if we have any questions. I'm not seeing any right now. Now is the time, folks. You have some of the premier tax experts and engineers in the room here. So if you have questions, please do surface them. We'll give you a couple of minutes. While we're waiting for questions, I just want to let everyone on the call know that next month in March, I believe on the 26th, we'll have another developer webinar focused on building tax integrations for marketplaces, and Bob Erdman, our resident expert on that, and a collection of other folks will be leading that call. I know marketplace is a big topic and only gaining more in importance as time goes on.
Jeff, you picked these 2 out, e-com and marketplaces, because that is just selling multiple channels. You did that on purpose.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Good job.
You know, we'll have a sign up for that soon, and so just want to make everyone aware of that. I am not seeing any questions.
Well, there's a couple questions that I get when I help our partners build e-com integration. So one of them is, people ask, Sara, what are the most common pitfalls? And I'll ask Wayne and Mark this too. I think one of the things that people do inadvertently is that they'll store or they'll cache that rate. And no, you want to make a live call every time.
Yeah, you want to use, if you're going to automate tax, if you're going to use AvaTax, you want to use the tax amount that's sent back based on the tax decision that the AvaTax tax engine generated. There's a lot of detail that comes back in that response payload and over and above the tax amount, but that's the key value that you need to place and store and present to the buyer.
Questions that I commonly run into, probably the most are, I can't authenticate.
Yep.
Why am I getting a zero tax calculation? And those are probably the two most common.
So what do you answer on the authentication?
It's usually you're using the wrong credentials and or contacting the wrong server.
Yeah.
And by all means, we have developer form, you can contact support, but that's a pretty easy one. Make sure you're contacting the correct server, and double check your credentials. If you can get into the AvaTax UI, your credentials are good. When you're building your integration, there's a help link in the AvaTax. If you get an error message, there's a help link in there. And we put a lot of effort into building out those error code messages. By clicking on that help link, you can get some pretty good guidance on why you're getting this error. And oftentimes, most developers are like, oh, okay, that error means what it says on the box. But if you're a little unclear, click on that one. There's at the bottom page that link takes you to, there's a pretty detailed explanation of why you got this error.
All right, so authentication, we get that a lot too. And then, why am I not getting tax back, which we alluded to earlier, which is typically because they don't have any jurisdictions checked in their company profile.
That
happens all the time.
Or, similar to that one is, this tax rate is different from what that state's Department of Revenue is saying. And here we get into the issues of tax tables. Why can't I just use tax tables? Well, the address you're looking at is in an unincorporated jurisdiction. This is super common. The tax table is all of the applicable sales taxes for that zip code. And very, very common issue. If you run into this, developer relations is happy to talk you through this one. We do on the regular. And this is where AvaTax's solution is much more powerful than using the tax tables. Sure, you can build for free off of the tax tables. We even will give those tax tables to you. That's built into our API. But you're not going to get the most accurate tax, and it could very potentially fall short or leave you open to...
Because zip codes don't align with taxing jurisdictions.
Exactly.
All right, so Jeff, I've got another question, unless somebody else has something.
No, I'm not seeing any questions.
So here is the other question that we get on a regular basis, or we'll ask, we say, do you sell inside the United States? And then the next question is, do you plan on selling across borders? So how can you help me with landed costs? Who wants to talk about that? All right, go for it, Wayne.
AvaTax, actually, if you have an AvaTax account, you can get the cross-border calculation using basically the same call. You add two more fields that you're using for create transaction, add in your HS code. So if you start to sell cross-border, add in your HS code and say...
An HS, what does that mean?
Harmonized system. This is how countries define physical goods being shipped into their country. And we won't we could really run into that rabbit hole, and I'll explain why we won't in a moment. But you tell AvaTax whether you're collecting duties on behalf of your buyer, or you say that the buyer is going to be paying the duties, and we'll give you a calculation of what the duties are for that item. Coming up in AvaTax before too long, all you do is tell us what you're selling Don't even have to go through the process of looking up HS code, and we will automatically
figure that out.
assign an HS code for you. That is powerful stuff, because if you've dealt with the harmonized system, this stuff is about like rocket science. I spent the last year working on the harmonized system API endpoints in REST, and it was painful. And I couldn't imagine having to be a seller with 100 or 1,000 SKUs that I now
14 or 20 or 30 countries,
and have to map that all of those SKUs.
Piece of cake.
Oh yeah, and we're simplifying that.
All right, Jeff, what else?
Yeah, so we have a question from Sara Radvansky. Thanks for your question, Sara. I think this is a question that's going to require a fair amount of nuance, but Sarah's asking, what is the average cost and timeline for implementing Avalara's tax engine in the U.S., and how is your software license fee structured?
I can talk a little bit about, well, let's first talk about building an integration. So I'll kind of just set the stage, and then I'll talk a little bit about pricing. So, you know what? Applications have different levels of nuances. Like it's probably fair to say that ERPs are more complex than e-commerce shopping carts or point-of-sale systems. So there's a wide variety of application types with levels of complexity that, of course, increase the amount of time it takes to build a thoughtful integration. But let's go Wayne first, then Mark. If you need to build an integration into a shopping cart, do you have any sort of rule of thumb about how long it takes? And let's assume you're using one of our SDKs, and then if you're not using one of our SDKs.
So I'd say best case scenario, 3 weeks for the integration, if I were doing it with an SDK. And then I would allocate another 3 weeks for use case testing. So design, build 3 weeks, test 3 weeks, deploy, right? For pretty simple integration.
Okay.
Yes. Now, if you have more complex selling scenarios, if your cart or your integration or your ERP, you can just start bolting on complexity. If you're developer confident, it has not been exposed to building and greenfielding solutions from scratch, you're going to see longer lead times, and you're going to want to tack on longer QA time on that. So we've seen some integrations at the enterprise level, in the 6 to 8 month range, but
but there's some crazy complexity.
Extreme
taxing,
levels
like
of complexity.
Multiple scenarios, special taxing, custom rules, workflows.
Hundreds of company locations.
Oh yeah.
So that just to provide a range, I'd say between 6 weeks to 6 months. I know that sounds like a ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean we've had customers report in that they were able to get it done in under a week. Like they just worked really hard on a weekend and they crammed it out. But I would say 90 days is kind of the target that you'd probably be looking to stake, and then if you needed to shrink it or expand it based on your use cases, to Wayne's point, based on the complexity, that'll happen.
And then when it comes to pricing, I'm happy to talk about this a little bit unless, Jeff, that you want to, but it really comes down to transaction levels, which is, do you plan on calling 100 times a year? Do you plan on calling 1,000, 10,000, 1 million? So Avalara's pricing is based on usage, which is, do you use it a little or do you use it a lot? And the variability comes from, Avalara supports small businesses to enterprise clients. And so, we designed this billing model to be able to support those different scenarios to accommodate all businesses of lots of sizes. But that's what it comes down to is amount of usage. All right, we are just about at time. Jeff, have you got any closing thoughts that you want to have here?
No, the only thing I would reiterate is to, before you hang up, for the folks on the call, please do check out the chat box and maybe grab those URLs that I put in there earlier for all the resources. You can find all that stuff either on avalara.com or developer.avalara.com as well. Just, thanks to everybody for attending and coming with questions, and thanks to the team for the presentation, especially Sarah for putting this together with Mark.
We care about tax. We do.
My team cares about your engineers. We want your engineers to be happy. So,
good. You guys care about the engineers. We're really looking out for those merchants and then trying to make the engineering process fast and seamless. Cool.
I'm gonna plug developer.avalara.com. That is the entry point for all things engineering with Avalara.
I will put that in the chat box as well, even though the tax demo is already in there and that sits on.
Yeah.
Can't say enough about the tax demo.
Yeah.
If you want to get rolling, that's the link. That's the page.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. Is a really, really slick demo, if I may say so myself.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Which Wayne helped build. All right, thanks everybody.